Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of She Talks Business. I hope you are enjoying our advisor series. I am enjoying the conversations that I'm having with people, and I hope that they are providing a lot of value for you. Today, we have a really interesting guest. We have Mo Syed, who is my immigration attorney. And he is someone that a lot of people have asked me about over the last couple of years because they want to know, hey, Lisa, how is it that you are a Canadian living in the USA? And how did you do that? What happened? It's like sometimes I think people think that I'm here illegally. Well, guess what? I'm not. We actually followed proper protocols and channels, and I've invited Mo to have a conversation with me about that today. So, Mo, welcome to the show.
Lisa, thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you here because I think that there's a lot of ambiguity around what it takes to be able to actually come to the United States to do business, whether it's permanently or part-time. And I think that a lot of people have, at least I did, have this big story in their mind about how difficult and complicated it is. And the truth is, it's really difficult and it's really complicated when you don't have the right person to guide you. So I'm glad that you and I get to have this conversation and people get to see a little bit of the behind the scenes. For those of you listening, in September of 2021, my husband and I decided that we wanted to take advantage of our E1 visas and stay in the United States for a couple of years. When all the COVID stuff was going on, we were just like, let's just go to Florida and just stay in Florida for 2 years. And, because in Canada at the time, things were locked down. They weren't locked down. They weren't. And I had a conversation with a woman who you will hear from on the show about what it meant to have to file taxes and stuff if we decided to stay in the States. And she is the person who introduced me to Mo. So when you have good advisors, they know other good advisors. So let's start, Mo, by talking about why is it important for someone like me or someone who is like me that wants to do business in the United States? Why is it important for them to engage the services in an immigration attorney, a professional, an expert like you?
Sure, Lisa. So I think, the first part of this is that someone like me, I've been working in the space of helping business people to get visas and immigration for a long time. And I've worked with folks that are coming to the US from different countries in different lines of business. So I've accumulated just like in your field, you have your expertise, what your core product or service is that you are providing your clients. A experienced immigration attorney can help you select the best option and to give you warnings of things that you may not have thought of on yourself, right? So somebody that has sort of uh, you know gone down the road before for other clients can be a really good guide for the long term.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
what comes to mind for me is you actually know, and I mean, it's not a game, but you know how to play the game. So when we had a conversation with you about what our long-term goals were, you were like, oh, that's easy. We do this and then we do this and then that happens. And so I didn't know any of that. So I think, it's sometimes we start out by thinking, oh, I need to get a green card. And the only way I'm going to get a green card is I apply to the green card lottery. And there's other paths and other ways that are accessible for people if they work with someone like you who knows what those paths are.
yeah.
So,
So the, sure, for me, it's extremely rewarding when I can play the role of a to bridge between, let's say, your business objectives and then my client's long-term plans. Like if you want to live and work in the U.S., and for me to play that role of being an effective advocate and guide is tremendously satisfying. Um, and for me to minimize the disruption to my client, like I want you to be focused on what you're good at and working with your clients, and for me to take that headache off of you so that I can go and worry about dealing with the government agency, gather the right evidence, not only to get the let's say the the immediate short-term need, but planning for the long term. Because some clients, they are exploring different ideas, and I want to give them, like they want to buy a new business in the US, or they have an existing business abroad that they want to expand in the US. For some clients, they themselves are happy where they live. They don't necessarily want visas, but maybe they want to send their key employees to the US to work,
Hmm.
right? So we assess the short-term and long-term objectives, and then we'll put a plan in place that will be, um, make life easier for the years to come.
So, why do you think people should engage in someone like you, like your services, versus just trying to wing it on their own? What are some of the pitfalls that people run into when they try to do this stuff on their own? I'm sure you've had lots of people who've tried to figure it out on their own, and then they end up on your doorstep because they couldn't figure it out.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like most people that have that are good business people, they know their business really well, right?
Mhm.
So the ins and outs of the business, and because you live and breathe your business every day, there are things that are as sort of, like black and white to you. But like my job is to persuade the government examiner, um, to that that your business is legitimate and that you qualify based on all the specified criteria. So
Mhm.
the value add is that I can quickly gather the required information from my clients and then repackage it in a very persuasive way. So a lot of people who think about lawyers, they think of how there's courtroom arguments in some of the popular TV shows where we're trying to win over a jury. So what I do is I don't present arguments orally in front of a judge or a jury, but I put everything down in paper. And there's a lot of strategy and try to definitely maximize the strengths and the relevant pieces, because not every piece of information is relevant. And so what I can do is present the case in a way that makes it easier for the examiners to review, because you may have a way of keeping your business records in your normal course of business, which is fine. It makes sense. You, as a manager or business owner, you have your records kept in a certain way. But the way the government wants the cases presented, they often need to be reshuffled.
Mhm.
And then the other thing is that, you know, with the business immigration cases, which you're talking about your livelihood, your long term, um, living and working in the U.S., we try to do an initial assessment, and we may say, hey, client, you have a very good profile, but you're not ready just now. Like, let's take 2 months or 3 months and work out some weakness areas. Let's make maybe like in one example in the present day is that the way we do business is different. Like, so in terms of, there's a lot of e-commerce, a lot of remote working,
Mhm.
people engaging in ways of doing business that where the laws were written for an older, maybe 20, 30 year ago, like a commercial set of facts that is now dramatically different. So often there are, like, this example comes up in remote working.
Mhm.
Like, the law, the regulation might say, hey, provide evidence of a office lease, but we say, hey, we don't need an office lease. We have space. We have home offices, or we have shared office arrangements. And so the lawyer can help help you from getting stuck on something. Like, a lot of clients might say, oh, sorry, we don't have a lease, so maybe we don't qualify for this visa. But I'd be like, no, that's okay. If you don't have a lease on a traditional office space, well, here's some other things that we could provide that will
Mhm.
satisfy that requirement.
Yeah, yeah, you were really helpful to me in that case because I mean, for the first year we did rent an office space, but then the second year, I remember saying to you, I would rather invest that money in hiring people because to me,
Mm.
we're never going to use the space, but if I need to use a space, I can afford to rent a space. And so we were able to come up with a different arrangement that still fulfilled the requirements on both sides, which was great. Um, I'd love for you to talk to me a little bit about techniques to present a strong case. I remember when we submitted for our L1 visa, one of the things that you said to me is that you thought it was one of the strongest cases you had ever presented, both just from a kind of a background perspective, but secondly, just in terms of visually how it was all put together. And so things like that, do things like that matter? Like, what are some things that people need to really think about in order to submit a strong case when they're trying to get some type of a visa or a green card?
Sure. So, I mean, just to, I'm glad like that I remember this conversation that you referenced, and uh, working with you, and I think because your own expertise is like business intelligence and consulting work, and you're also very visual. So we working with you, you presented evidence in such a effective way using the right technology tools, and
Mhm.
you have a very effective style of just organizing information. So that makes my job a lot easier because I don't have to rework a lot of things. And so I think that was one um, uh, plus point in working with your business. Plus, I mean, um, having a robust like your organizational structure in both overseas in Canada and the US, you had already a very mature
Mhm.
business that was operating because often my clients are starting from scratch. And so they have not yet generated the kind, I mean, they may have a strong on the L1 side, which is just for those who don't know, it's an intercompany transfer where um, a person that is either the owner of an organization or is a key executive can be transferred from a foreign country where they've worked for at least 1 year and then be transferred to the US to either a new company or an existing company. And so a lot of the cases I have where there's really not been a lot of US activity historically,
Mhm.
they can be tough. Um, but I think, it's a combination of a very serious business plan, a very good grasp on, okay, what is our market? Who are we looking for as clients? How will we do it? How will we build a company and grow it? And then convincing the USCIS examiner that this is, that Mo's client is actually a serious applicant that's really going to be generating jobs in the US and generating revenues and tax versus uh, unfortunately there is fraud out there. People do
Mhm.
file applications that are frivolous. But so to sort of wrap up, now when we're dealing with a country that's a English speaking country where there's a mature legal setup like Canada, a lot of the documentation will have a like the tax forms, the accounting, the bank records, styles of contract agreements, invoices.
Very
They
similar.
they're similar. They're similar. So there's an advantage across English speaking countries. I do have clients that come from cultures that are very different, where it gets very difficult. Sometimes I have clients that are in a cash heavy culture where they have payroll, they have multiple employees, but they've paid everyone in cash. And so they don't have the US style tax or payroll records. And so then the challenge is working with those clients to um, guide them to how to effectively document their cases,
Mhm.
where it's the US is realistic. The US examiners know that, hey, people do business differently across different countries. And as long as what you're demonstrating is consistent with the business practice in the home jurisdiction, cases get approved.
Mhm. So years ago, someone told me I believe it was the first immigration attorney that I worked with in Canada when I wanted to get an E1 visa. I
Mm.
believe back then she told me that I needed to generate at least $100,000 a year in US business to even qualify for an E1 visa. Is that a similar threshold? Does that exist today? Like, what kind of, I mean, the vast majority of our business is done in the US. So, I mean, we probably do $1 million in business in the US easily. But what
Yeah.
is the minimum threshold that somebody should be thinking of in order to be taken seriously in terms of their revenues in the United States?
Sure. So let me just a quick I guess I want to talk a little bit about the differences between the E's and the L's,
Mm-hmm.
and why some of these dollar threshold amounts are important. Um, so the E visa category, that's going to be you need to first be a citizen of a country with which the U.S. has a treaty of trade and investment. So that E visa is a treaty trader or an investor. And then, so the trader piece is will be based on a volume of trade between your home country and the U.S. There's really no, and then the investor is then investing money of whatever numerical value, and so whether it's like 100,000 in trade we're talking about or 100,000 investment, those numbers are, the core idea is that it's a substantial investment or a
Mm-hmm.
substantial trade. There's not a bright line rule. Like there's not a rule that says, hey, you need 100,000 minimum or more in this case. However, it the way the numbers impact the sort of assessment is that, is this enough of an investment or a revenue that will keep or trade quantity that demonstrates a business organization that's more than just the livelihood of the one owner.
Right,
Okay, so
right.
so I
So,
say, okay,
can you hire people?
exactly that. So the rules are that when they're looking at your data and your business activity, that it is not like a let's say an independent consultant that stays busy and does and just makes enough money to, keep themselves a roof on their heads and food on their table, but you're actually investing substantially or trading substantially in a way that you will fund the growth of a business entity. Now that's on the E side. Now the interesting thing about the E is that now not so much the trader, but on the investor side, there's also a anti-money laundering component, because you're not really on the E visas, you don't need to show that there's a foreign existing operational entity like an E, and an E can just be like a straight um, investment by someone that's not a business owner. There, it could be someone that is a professional outside of the US and they sell some property or they happen upon some money and they buy a new US business so that they could start a E without really having a business background. But where that money is coming from gets a lot of scrutiny. So the amount of money and its connection to the value of the US operation is relevant. But rule of thumb, I say to folks that budget at least like 6 months or a year of operating revenue.
Hmm.
So have enough that you can show that you're able to rent space, hire employees, build a website, any, capital investments you need if you need to buy equipment, whatever. So that's kind of on the E side. On the L side, again, it's not, so the L is even more removed from any type of numerical threshold. So the how L will rely on a company existing overseas that has the financial wherewithal to fund a US sister operation. And so in the L, you have to show that, okay, the home entity has bank accounts as well as revenues coming in. And then let's say the US business plan has a projection of revenues, and then at the time you're applying, you can have like savings that may be small, but as long as there's a revenue projection that says we'll be able to fund the first year of our operations, that's where you want to be.
Hmm.
But generally, immigration lawyers, they use that 100,000 as a uh, mm, like a safety, that
Right.
anything below that starts getting suspicious.
Right.
But I have had cases approved with less than that.
Right. So, a lot of people ask me, what is the path if I want to speak in the United States? Like, I want to come in and I want to host an event, or I want to come in and I want to do consulting work or coaching work. What should people be thinking about? Maybe they don't want to come and live here permanently, but they want to ensure that what they're doing is above board. You and I've talked about this before, that customs is a lot savvier today than they once were. You're only going to get away with coming in and saying you're visiting family a certain number of times before somebody Googles you and finds out you're actually here doing business. So, what should people be considering if they want to just come in and out of the country? Do they need some type of a visa? Should they have a relationship with someone like you to help them?
So it's extremely important, especially for those people who want to continue to travel in and out of the USA and not put at risk their right to enter the US. Now, citizens of Canada and citizens of many other countries, they do have this visa free ability to travel. So there's a visa waiver program. Canadians are allowed to get visas on arrival. However, if what is not allowed is to have a employment relationship with a U.S. employer and providing services while you're in the U.S. So it's very important that now, like we were discussing earlier, like there's a lot of uh, activity that is borderline. There are people that come in, and let's say what's allowed is you can come in, meet with clients, have business meetings. You can go and do site visits. You can participate in trainings and conferences, and where there's but the main idea is that your salary source and your compensation is based in an overseas company that's sending you to do a permissible business activity. But it's not that you're coming into the US to provide services to US employers and then being paid by those. So it's and there are certain nuances. Like one example that some people during the pandemic they got into trouble is that when certain people, I mean, when there were no flights going out of the US, people got stuck in the US for extended periods of time,
It
but they
almost
had
happened to
jobs.
us.
They had jobs what they could do remotely, and but being in the US for a certain length of time and continuing to work is not allowed up to it'll be considered on the visa categories. A visitor visa category does not allow any kind of extended work. So it's important for me to be able to understand what are people trying to do. There is a lot of activity that I mean, I think the rules try to be reasonable. I mean, there are some activities that are incidental to employment that are allowed. But then after a certain point, then you've got to start looking at whether a work visa is required. And it's better to be safe than sorry, because, like you were saying, I mean, these days, I've had cases where a person upon entry to the US presented themselves and told a story that, oh, I'm just going to visit some friends. But then when the border officers, they can look through your phone, they can look at your laptop, and if they're seeing text messages and emails where it is very apparent that someone's in the US and taking orders or being paid by a US employer, it like you're saying, it's easy for the government to investigate and find out, and that's a misrepresentation charge, and that will be that's not a good situation to be in to violate the terms of your visa. Um, So I
Yeah, I
do
wouldn't
think,
want that to happen. That would be scary. I always think of, those shows that Locked Up Abroad, right? Although it's not the same when you're traveling between Canada and the US, you're just going to basically be sent home. But you never want that on your record. You never want to be in a situation where if you legitimately want to spend more time in the United States, that you've done something that could actually cause you to permanently be flagged every time you try to come into the country. So I think it's like anything. When you have the right advisor to guide you, you know what to do. I remember, at one point, my husband had a little bit of a challenge going through customs, and they were questioning him because he flew home. We still lived in Canada and worked in Canada and had companies in Canada, and he flew home without luggage because he was coming home for a few days to take care of business, and we had a home in Canada, so we had clothing and everything, and then flying back to our house in Florida. And I ended up speaking to an attorney at that point, and they recommended that if you do go back and forth a lot, but you have a business at home in Canada and you're legitimately not, doing anything inappropriate in the United States, that you carry evidence that you really do have a home in Canada. You carry, a copy of your checkbook, you carry a copy of, your utility bills, like some things that can actually prove evidence that you are not you are not dependent on an income in the United States for your survival.
yes. So, and that's a very important point you made. And the not only is when most people are coming into the U.S. as visitors, now it could be a visitor for pleasure or a visitor for business. Showing, talking about what you're going to be doing in the U.S.
Mhm.
And that you have enough financial resources to not need to work or be, that's important. But it is also important that you demonstrate that you've got a home to go back to, or like an employment. And
Mhm.
so at every entry, that's what a individual that seeks entry to the US as a visitor is saying, that I'm coming in for a legal activity, and my intent is to return back to
Yeah.
my home country because I have a home. And I mean, and to your point, I mean, um, and this also goes to different cultural and language norms. Like, I've had clients that let's say lawyers that are lawyers in for foreign countries, and they come to attend, or business people or whatever, doctors, and they're coming to the US to attend a conference.
Mhm.
Now, the conference is work related, but it's not work. But if someone's not a very fluent English speaker, like I've had a client who, upon entry, they asked, he was coming for a conference, and the officer said, "Why are you coming to the U.S.?" And he said, "Oh, I'm coming for work." And he said, when he should have said, I'm coming for a conference that's work
Mhm.
related."
Yes.
But the officer got the impression that, oh, he's coming here to work, and he said, "Sorry, we can't let you in," and turned him around.
Yeah.
And if this person had talked to me before they did this, I would have coached them. I said, "Here's how you describe what you're doing. Just
Yeah.
don't blanket say you're coming here to work." Like, but
Right. Because even though for you, well, I'm going to work, I'm going to conferences work, it's the way it's perceived, right?
exactly. So like,
Yeah.
sorry, you can't come in on this visa. You need to go and get a work visa if you
Right.
want to come and work.
Right. I was also given the advice at one point, which was answer the question, but don't offer too much information. That sometimes what happens is people start talking on and on and on and on because they're nervous and they actually talk themselves out of what was actually legitimate. And so, um, if you're coming in on business, you can say, I'm coming in on business, and you don't have to say what that business is unless someone asks you. I was also
Yeah.
advised at one point that I should carry a file folder with all the information. If I was coming in to speak at an event, have a copy of the agenda for the event, have a copy of my hotel, have a copy of the invoice that my company billed the supplier, like to have all that stuff on hand so that if I was questioned, I could legitimately say, look, this is what I'm coming in for, but not to walk up to the counter and open my folder and give everything. Have it if you need it, but you know, don't necessarily go overboard in explaining yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fine balance. I mean, I advise my clients to try to be relaxed and just, factually accurate, and um try to But I do recommend being brief
Hmm.
and just answer the question that's asked because these officers don't have a lot of time
Yeah.
and they want to just sometimes have a clear, direct answer. Uh, and it's fair to say you can ask questions like, hey, okay, well, did you ask me a open-ended question? Do what exactly are you looking for? If there's a clarifying question needed, that's fine.
Hmm.
Um, and often the point about the documentation and supporting evidence, it's always a good idea for peace of mind, because sometimes the officer, I mean, because it's a credibility determination that they're
Hmm.
making, and sometimes if there's a borderline case, if they don't, and by giving them a piece of paper that supports what you're saying, whether it's a copy of a bank statement or copy of an employment letter, then you're helping them so that
Right.
they're not just relying on your word,
Hmm.
right? So having some of that evidence handy helps you, because the officer can then say, "Oh yeah, okay, fine. I've done some due diligence. I've looked at some papers, and now I can approve their
Right.
application for any."
Hmm. Well, Mo, this has been extremely helpful. I know that this is a topic that is of interest to a lot of our listeners because people ask me about it all the time. So I'd like to thank you for, contributing your expertise and being on the show. And for those of you who are listening, I will have all of Mo's contact information listed in the show notes so that you can reach him if you have questions of your own. I think that he's demonstrated pretty firsthand here why, if you want to do business in a country that isn't your own, it makes really, really smart sense to have someone who can advise you and coach you on exactly how to make that happen. So thank you very much, Mo. I
Yeah,
appreciate your expertise.
you're welcome, Lisa. And it's been a great pleasure being your guest here. And uh, what is so rewarding for me is to see brilliant, uh, nice, hardworking people like you and my other clients, and you're certainly one of the most impressive in terms of your business model itself is so interesting, and you're also in sort of the branding and marketing parts of your work are always very top notch. So for me to learn from you as well about what you do, and then what I tell people is that what I love about doing what I do is that I um, help America keep its multicultural, multi sort of, its rich heritage that's based on the hard work of immigrants from other
Hmm.
parts of the world. I mean, everybody pretty much that's here at some point, if you go back far enough, they came from some other part of the world, and people bringing ideas, people bringing energy and cultures, and I mean, it's the role that I play and I get to play with my clients, that's so rewarding, right? So I thank you for giving me this opportunity, and hopefully it will help some people, and I look forward to chatting with you again sometime.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mo. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you on our next episode of She Talks Business.